Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nigel Sillitoe from Inside Discovery, and I have the great honor of moderating this session, which is, as you will well know, on the subject of wealth transfer, multi-generational wealth planning. And it's a very hot topic at the moment, particularly here in the Middle East, given where the oil price is and the amount of wealth that's been created over the last year or two, even during this rather strange COVID period. And that's obviously due to the exceptionally high oil price, also property inflation, as many of you will be aware. Properties, particularly in Dubai and on the Palm and other locations, have spiraled almost out of control. And I've noticed from my role as heading up a research company that there are more and more investment management companies, private banks setting up in the Middle East. So this is a very timely session, given the amount of wealth that's being created, in addition to the trillions that's already here in the GCC. And it's going to be obviously of great value to the thousands of family offices which exist in the GCC as well. So please say we have some exceptional experts to help us with this panel debate. And please do remember, if you're watching, to share questions, because personally, having done many of these events before, I think the best value comes from people asking questions, which I will see via WhatsApp and then share with our team of experts. So let me start off by introducing our panelists. I'll start with a good friend of mine who I've known for many years, Mohamed Azab, who I think I first met some 25 years ago. Mohamed is actually now officially semi-retired. So congratulations, Mohamed. Good to see you again. And Mohamed is someone who I first met at Citi, where he headed up private banking. Then he moved to the well-known Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, where he again headed up private banking. And he's had many areas of experience in wealth management and private banking. I'm not going to go through his entire career, otherwise we could be here for the next 30 minutes or so, but he's a very seasoned ex-private banker, so welcome, Mohamed. We also have, thank you, my pleasure. We also have Richard Camwell, who's a client relationship director at GSB Capital, which is a advisory wealth management firm regulated here in DIFC. And Richard, until about a year back, was based in the UK, so his experience is very UK-centric, but that's no bad thing given the number of British expats living in the Middle East. And he was previously a relationship manager with HSBC, where he had 4 years giving advice on legacy and estate planning, particularly to high net worth individuals. So his experience, particularly on succession planning, is highly relevant. We also have, just bear with me one tick, Antoine Yazbek, who I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting in person, but welcome, Antoine. And he's participating today in his private capacity as an advisor to family offices. And Antoine has spent 15 years with one of the largest private family offices in the world, the Olian Group, which is Saudi-based. And I think you were based in the Athens office. Is that correct, Antoine?
Correct.
Okay, great. And for the past 5 years, he's been helping family offices and high net worth investors to manage their investments with a focus on tech, venture capital, and crypto, which I'm sure will come up because that seems to be the topic of the day. And an important part of his work has been to bridge the gap between traditional investment asset classes and new technologies that attract the next generation within families. So that's our team of experts today. And what I thought we could do is just start it off by looking at the great wealth transfer that's happening around the world, but also here in the Middle East. And for some reason, this is already top of mind. For others, the mindset or culture for wealth management and succession planning is simply not there. So maybe I could ask Mohamed, I'm not asking you first because of your age and experience, but maybe you could kick things off, please. What's your take on this?
Yes, thank you so very much for the very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. I've been in the business in private banking for the past 17 years, the last part of my career as a banker. And the issue and the discussions of succession planning and so forth has been absolute center to our discussion, especially working for organizations like Citibank, City Private Bank. It was bringing in the Western experience and wealth management and wealth transfer into the to the Middle East culture, to the Middle East business. And there is what I found through my experience in dealing with clients and dealing with the bank internally as well, is there is a lot different structurally the wealth between how it is dealt with in the Western world compared to what I would call our part of the world. Actually, the whole family office concept is relatively new to our part of the world. The whole idea of having family offices, manage the wealth professionally, and all of that is not something that you would see typically across the business of the wealthy families. And I would say there are also this varies depending on the size and the sophistication of the wealth that we deal with. Different clients have different ways of dealing with it, but it is a relatively new concept. It is really the whole concept again of family offices is the relatively there are few and far in between in terms of how many families actually deploy the concept of family offices. And that probably relates to the fact that there is absence of the relevant laws that in our part of the world. We've all known that now just recently and most recent history, we've seen the DIFC, we've seen the ADGM kind of attempts on putting some sort of a structure, legal structure around family offices. So most of the wealth as well, part of the reason of not the family office concept and therefore the transfer of wealth did not take up is the fact that uh, most of the wealth is generally held by families in the Middle East, in the family business itself, the being the trading business, manufacturing business, and so forth, and to a larger extent as well, in the real estate assets of the family. So that's that. There is a much more or a lot smaller portion of that wealth is usually held in what would we call international assets, international investments, and so forth. Be it equities, bonds, and or even real estate, compared to what they would have in this part of the world. Uh, so the fact that is lack of laws, the fact that a lot of the wealth is held and managed by the family themselves, the fact that the concept is relatively new, has been elements to impact the discussion or the implementation or deployment of really the concept of family offices. One last point on this as well, there is also the element of what I would call the religion part of it. It does play within the Middle Eastern, generally Muslim people. It plays a part in the discussion because it's just not in the psychic of the uh, patriot to actually having to distribute wealth before he passes away. It's usually they rely on that there are certain rules and certain inheritance guidelines that are set already by the religion that distribution of that wealth will be distributed according to Sharia and being Sharia compliant in terms of distribution of wealth. So that's also another element or another fact that plays into the discussion. I'd like to stop at this here, Nigel, and just leave the floor
Okay, yeah,
for.
sure. That, okay, great. I do have one other question for you later, but maybe Antoine, you can now step in, and then Richard.
Sure.
So Antoine, over to you if you don't mind. Antoine, can you hear me? Okay, I think we're having some technical issues with Antoine. So while we're trying to sort that out, maybe Richard, you can step in, yeah?
Hi, Nigel. Yes, very, very interesting topic. And obviously hello to everyone else listening as well. So this is a topic, you know, around the world. You mentioned the great wealth transfer. So just to sort of put people in the picture in terms of what that really is, with the baby boomer generations, with, you know, so many people born, you know, in the sort of late 40s, 50s, that are now approaching, you know, into their 70s. I think over the next 10 years, I think it's calculated around $68 trillion will pass around the world to the next generation. So this is such a massive topic and is only going to get bigger and bigger as I say, as these generation then move to the age and will sadly pass. I guess from my experience, looking around, advising on estate planning, as I'd call it in the UK, or succession planning, is actually the conversation that is had with the individual, and actually broaching that subject. You know, so many people don't really, you know, it's not a nice thing to talk about, is your own mortality. You know, you don't want to talk about your loved ones passing away. I don't want to think about my parents passing away. And just to have that sort of discussion, be it with an actual financial advisor, with a wealth manager, quite often doesn't happen. And even just starting that conversation with family members in terms of what is going to happen. Obviously, Mohamed mentioned in terms of here, you know, a lot of wealth is held in companies. You know, and the discussion needs to be had about what is going to happen to that company. Obviously, with key people that are running that business, how, you know, how is that business going to continue if, or when really is when you know, somebody passes away, if that is the owner of the business or even people within that business as well. So such a massive, you know, conversation that needs to be had. And really at any age for me is just to start having that conversation, be it, as I say, with family members or with financial advisors as well, just so at least you can start getting that plan in place, and then, you know, progressing to solutions and what ultimately will happen with the passing of one generation to the next.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Richard. Is Antoine back online? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Ah, great. Okay, welcome. So can we have your thoughts as well, please?
Sure. I agree with the comments that were made. I think there are two separate topics. There's first addressing just the intergenerational handover, and then there's actually the different approaches in investments themselves. So it's one thing even getting the conversations going about how to structure your family office for the next generation. And even those who are open to the idea, we've noticed there's definitely a difficulty in handing over any control. And I think this is very normal when you've built a certain wealth and you've been part of the generation that has built that wealth over 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It usually takes time for you to relax your control over investment decisions. And so I've spent a lot of time more on that topic with families who already recognize the need for the second generation or the next generation to be involved, and then what is the best structure to do that and to allow these two worlds to come together. The previous generation needs to embrace what the new generation is getting interested in, which is technology, startups, crypto, all of this world that they've grown up with and that fascinates them, and especially that they see that a lot of the returns and a lot of the wealth creation is happening at their end. So the new generation knows that they won't be able to build a similar type of fortune by investing in real estate or definitely not bonds or fixed income. So they do want to go on being able to create wealth themselves. So I I do definitely agree, but the most important is actually getting the family to already be open and agree on how important it is to prepare the structure for the next generation while they're still around, and not wait till the last minute. Waiting till the last minute, from my experience at least, has always provoked a lot of problems and actually creates wealth destruction, because if you do not structure things properly, then this floating period until the next generation figures it out could destroy wealth.
Great, no, some very useful insights. Thanks for that, Antoine. So let's look at something that's very important. That is, what can we learn from wealthy families in developed markets, particularly, let's say, in the US, and how can we make sure that there's a successful wealth transfer from one generation to another in the Arab world? So maybe, Mohamed, you can kick off with that.
I'm not sure really, Nigel, whether the Middle Eastern wealthy families recognize the need to actually do wealth planning and wealth transfer. I think the fact that, probably just to use a case in point is the most recent history. I don't know of any entity in this part of the world that is more organized than MAFT, which is Majid Al Futtaim Trust. That's an organization that's been built very professionally, managed professionally, wealth and local real estate, you name it. It's probably one of the best managed family offices and investment portfolios across the region. And probably we all heard about the passing away of, unfortunate pass away of Majid Al Futtaim. But subsequent to that, you've all also heard that despite all the professional work that was done around the wealth management, around the wealth distribution, about the family office, the trust, and all of that, at the end of the day, when push came to shove, the situation had to reach all the way to government, very senior member of the government in the UAE and in Dubai in particular, and had to make judgments in terms of how the wealth will be distributed. I think the idea of that, the legal implications that might result from having a structure outside the UAE. The UAE does not recognize a trust, for example. Trust is not something that is really within the proper UAE jurisdiction. Trust is not a recognized law per se. The UAE law of the land applies the Islamic Sharia rules, and therefore, when it comes to distribution of wealth, despite of whatever agreements you have, that's the law of the land, and that's what eventually will apply. Obviously, given the fact that MAFT is a huge organization, has impact over the UAE economy and Dubai economy, is the very senior member of the government have actually come in, and ruling family have to come in and actually sort things out between the family members. So to me is whether we can really bring in that knowledge, that expertise, that implementation of the concept altogether to our part of the world. Still is a lot of discussion about whether its applicability, its usability, the benefit of it versus what really can actually happen in the real world.
Great, thanks, Mohamed. If I can pass the baton on to you, Antoine, if you want me to repeat the question, ask away.
Yes, please.
Okay, so what lessons can be learned from the experience of wealthy families, let's say, in the US, as we do wealth transfer from one generation to another here in the Arab world?
Well, definitely getting the next generation involved very early on, and not necessarily only in the family office portfolio management, but in any investment capacity. I think there's a lot of personal trust that needs to be built between a generation and the next generation. And I've seen it happen quite a few times where the next generation gets their training in different institutions and then come back relatively early and get acquainted with the family's business. And one thing that helps is when you build internal knowledge inside the team. So to build that trust and to be able to feel that, okay, the next generation is actually ready to invest and to make their own decisions without risking crazy destruction of wealth. Usually you want to bring back this knowledge expertise as much as possible within your team. So what I'm saying is that instead of relying solely on external reports or opinions or private banks or investment banks, you need to also have that in-house so that the previous generation that is handing over feels that the generation that is going to take over is making sound investment decisions based on their own analysis rather than just by being swayed by different opinions. And that takes time to build internal knowledge. At the Olayan Group, there are 4 offices that only do that, that have internal analysts, internal research. So it's much of a collaborative world between what the external world provides as information and studies and research, and then digesting that and forming your own opinion that is relevant to the DNA of the family and what the strategy of the family requires. And that can take anywhere between 1 and 5 years to build that level of trust that there's a system working, hiring people. That's another topic. I hope I'm not opening Pandora's box, but you also need to invest in people internally. I'm aware that not all sizes of families can afford that. So this is mostly relevant to portfolios that could sustain having a structure, but those who have should definitely have more in-house reliance rather than externally, and that is definitely something that I've seen in European and US families pretty extensively.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Richard.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I mean, for me, is that the developed world still hasn't got it right. Obviously, there are lessons to learn from them, but again, there's still lessons that the US, that the UK, needs to learn. And as I said initially, this subject needs to be put out there for more people to discuss. Even sort of music stars they've got, Michael Jackson's estate is still not resolved, so these conversations and it doesn't always work for everyone. I guess from my experience, being in a taxable jurisdiction in the UK, with inheritance tax, for those that are unaware, after allowances, the inheritance tax in the UK is 40%. So, this is something that is obviously going to erode considerable amount of wealth if things aren't properly structured. So this sort of, puts it more to the mind that things need to be done. Whereas obviously here, not having that. And I guess also the fact that having previous generations that have sought advice and have got things properly structured, if I inherited my father's business, knowing the fact that it had been properly structured, then when I get to a certain age, I'm going to think, well, that is certainly paramount to me, that then I'm going to want to pass it on then to my children, and then the structures need to be put in place. Obviously, having a lot of young companies here, where they've been set up by the founders are still alive. They've not had that experience where they've received that business down, and therefore it is new. It's something very different. But yes, it's having more conversations. And certainly around the family, as Antoine said, those conversations need to be had. you know, who wants to be part of this business. You know, with children now going around the world, you know, getting educated in different parts of the world, going to the US, you know, ultimately, are they going to settle there? You know, do they still want to be part of the business? Is that going to cause, you know, conflict? Is that going to cause, you know, potential tax? You know, if they're moving to a tax jurisdiction as well. So yes, yeah, for me is, you know, it's never too soon to have that conversation, and then just start planning, and discussing it as well, and working out what wants to be done, and who wants part of businesses, and obviously, you know, what ultimately will happen.
Great, thank you, Richard. Moving on to the next question, which is, what are the key components for a holistic wealth management planning and succession planning service? So maybe Antoine, you can start off on this.
Well, I want to feed off what Richard was saying. It's basically a whole lot of communication. That is the number one ingredient. I think once you have all the facts laid out in front of you, the solutions are pretty straightforward, in the sense, not the implementation of the solution, but the different routes. So I would say clarity on the different levels. So one is structuring, when we're talking about jurisdiction, about the legalities of the thing. Then very importantly, an investment strategy. So it's not only about managing logistically what you already have, but it's also a lot about the direction. The next generation has 10, 20, 40, 50 years ahead of them of active investment life. So it's never too early to start the strategy conversation, because strategy is also something that is very dynamic and alive, that will evolve with time. And the more there is this idea of strategic thinking, because some people who get parachuted into a family after generations of investments, it's hard for them to have the bird's eye view of how to manage things. They tend to be pigeonholed into certain aspects of the business or into certain type of investments. So it's important to have that high level macro view. And thirdly, I would say surround yourself with the team and the appropriate people that will take you on this journey, that usually, again, takes time. This is something that is also underestimated. You don't restructure something in a couple of months, just even with the best intentions and the best communication. Structuring, planning, and implementing can take anywhere from a few months to a couple of years, and I'm sure my esteemed colleagues will confirm.
Great, thank you. And Richard?
Yes, I guess from my point of view, key components. I mean, every situation, every individual is different, and you know, different solutions will fit different people and different companies as well. As a basic key component, I would say sort of bringing it back more to wealth management and making sure that the portfolio is well diversified. So not too much exposure to, you know, any particular area, and also, you know, making sure that everything is risk managed as well, and people are aware in terms of what level of risk is taken with each individual investment. I would say, to me, is sort of key. In terms of then individuals, then again, depending on the size of the wealth, obviously trusts we've touched on, you know, is such a big area in order to be a solution. Many different sort of trusts that can be set up. I know sort of around the world, certainly in the UK, we have an excluded property trust, which effectively then, if for non-domiciles, if they're moving to the UK, which means then that can be shielded from inheritance tax. And also in the US, I think you've got a foreign grantor trust, and Canada have got various different trusts as well. So, trusts as a whole can, differ from what type of trust and exactly what they contain. But that generally tends to be, the sort of first solution people will move to. Setting up a private trust company, unit trusts or funds that are privately set up, potentially a foundation, and many different solutions can be, and therefore it is dependent on that individual and what the sort of plans are as to what the solutions would be, I would say.
Great, thank you. We just had an interesting question in from one of the delegates saying, how can we thrust wealth management into mainstream for affluent and mass affluent? And for my penny's worth, one thing might be to ensure that there's more advertising from either the regulators or from investment management companies or wealth management companies. Because when I walk around, let's say Singapore, London, you see adverts all the time promoting wealth management services. But here in the Middle East, it's so barren. I mean, apart from maybe some TV adverts when you walk around the DIFC, it's few and far between. So it'd be good to get your thoughts to this question. So maybe Mohamed, you can kick off.
I'd like to just also just address or echo what Richard just alluded to earlier. One of the biggest drivers for people to go into wealth structuring is the issue of taxation. Taxation, if you mention taxation to a client who has exposure to outside the Middle East, that would be a major driver for him to make a decision regarding taking up a wealth structure or a trust and so forth. At least from my own personal experience with working with so many families in the region, is that was the main driver for them to make a decision to actually into wealth structuring. I think that's a key driver, and it's really need to be highlighted.
Great, thank you. So Antoine and then Richard.
Yes, I think there's a lot of communication that can be made on that front. I'm not sure if advertising provides the required level of trust when you hear that, but I think it's education. To be honest, the new generation that I deal with a lot are very aware of that, and they actually seem to understand asset classes. They seem to understand different strategies. They seem to understand different risk rewards depending on each strategy, and a lot of them make their own arguments around how the risk reward in certain asset classes is so much more interesting than what their parents used to invest in, and make that comparison. How to get the current generations to get more involved in their wealth management? To be honest, given their profiles, it's really it's a one-on-one education type of relationship, because it takes time to take people from point A to point Z. In this case, it's not going to be a single conversation. It's really approaching the topic from all different angles, and I like the fact that taxation is highlighted, because it's always the easiest opener for a conversation. When you tell someone that they could be optimizing their structures and their tax obligations, they tend to listen, but it shouldn't be limited to that point. And I think it's much more about the upside, highlighting the upside of getting your affairs in order. And also, very importantly, using world examples like Mohamed brought to the table of how things can go wrong if you do leave things to luck or to the laws, to the prevailing laws. So Unfortunately, I don't have any magic wand suggestions to offer.
Okay, no problem. No problem. I think when I talk about advertising, obviously I'm including digital marketing. But if I just get on my soapbox for a minute, one thing that really upsets me and other people I meet is the number of adverts from companies that aren't actually regulated and making ridiculous claims of 30 to 50% a year. So there should be stricter controls on those companies who are advertising with all the disclaimers added, which obviously happens in the UK and many other developed markets. So that's my tuppence worth on that subject.
Yeah.
But maybe Richard, because you're got involved obviously in the wealth management area, your thoughts on this subject as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you've really sort of I was going to say struck a nerve, but something in also what Antoine mentioned is trust as well, and to be an advisor, to be able to be intimate with a client, that you're able to go through all of their wealth. There needs to be such an amount of trust that is built between that, and therefore, as you said, sort of advertisement doesn't necessarily sort of give that trust. Obviously, my clients will sort of then go and speak to their friends, to their family, and refer clients on where that trust is built. I guess the conversation isn't necessarily had around succession planning. They might sort of just have the conversation about how their investments are doing, because that tends to be the exciting bit of wealth management is, oh, my investments have done well. Oh, I'll chat with my friend about it. I've got an advisor, he's done really well. Whereas, oh yes, my advisor sat there for 2 hours discussing when I'm going to die and what I'm going to do. So it's not something that is pushed to the forefront at all. Obviously, you touched on regulation. We're a GSB based in the DIFC, so we have heavy regulation from the DFSA. Whereas onshore, as we call it, sort of outside of the DIFC, you've then got the regulators. You've got the insurance regulator. You've also got the Securities and Commodities Authority, and then you've also got the central bank as well. So it does for individuals to understand that sort of concept of where a company is based, what they're sort of regulated to do is very confusing. Whereas coming from the UK, having that what was one regulator, I mean, they made it more confusing with the Prudential Regulation Authority and the FCA as well. But for me, is having a clear regulator that does regulate against these sort of adverts, where people who are relatively naive when it comes to investments, and we'll see even in the lift I saw an advert for Bitcoin, how well it had done, and there was a and I was thinking, well, I think, by the time I've seen this advert, I think it's dropped another 20%. So again, these kind of adverts need to be very, very careful, because people will put their money into these things and not really, have a clue, and sadly lose a lot of wealth as well. So yeah, for me, regulation is a massive part, which can support good quality advisors that are trusted, and will be able to help and support as well. And then, going on with Anton in terms of the education, I know there was a session yesterday around the sort of education, which is very interesting. Again, even in the developed world as well, so many subjects. We were even sort of having a chat about it in the office, some of the subjects that we did that, we haven't used as adults, whereas having lessons on, basic sort of budgeting, basic sort of finance, I think really, really would help. And I think that's something the whole world needs to understand, so that, children do grow up and understand that, getting 30% a year from an investment is not going to happen, and therefore then it sort of progresses through, and they want to learn more, and eventually then when they do become adults, that they do then push for more education and what they're going to do in terms of passing their wealth down to their children as well.
Sure, no, good point. We have one more question, which I'm going to just pass to Antoine. So this is from a delegate. Should family members be involved in the management of the family office to be able to make the right investment decisions, or is having an external investment advisor all they need?
External advisor for sure.
I thought you might say that. Yeah.
No, I think this is a real personal decision. It's always good to have a family member, but the family member wants to really want it because it involves theoretically a lot of work and a lot of energy, and depending on how extensive and active the family office is. They can choose to have different levels of involvement. It can be more of a chairmanship and just have a high level supervisory role rather than a very meticulous, detailed day-to-day role. But to get to that point, you need to make sure that you have the right team. In terms of, and very important point, a family member that is not in the right spirit of things can actually cause more issues than actually resolve them. So I know this is a very controversial point to make. Who decides who is in the right attitude or not? I usually leave that to the families to decide for themselves. But it's more to highlight that you actually don't need to absolutely be there. And I've seen a lot of next gen who declare from the beginning is like, thank you very much for everything the family has done for me, but I want to go be a historian. I want to go be a teacher. I cannot be involved. It's not for me. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the passion for it. And I prefer to give way to a cousin or to a sister or to a brother to do it better. So I think rather more importantly, it is the attitude and the willingness to evolve into the role that is more important. As for advisors, it is on a case by case, but whether it's advisor or internally, I think it's crucial to surround yourself with people who can help, and ideally with advisors that are aligned with your interests. Because I think traditionally, one of the things that have plagued a lot of families is that, yes, you have some great private banks and some great private bankers, but it's extremely hard to forge a continuously aligned relationship, because at the end of the day, a private bank needs to make a living as well. So if you do have advisors on your side that are more aligned with specifically what you need and what the DNA of your family is, then I would say it's important to have one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid to say we've run out of time. So thank you, Antoine, for your insight, plus Mohamed and Richard, and congratulations to Ibrahim and his team for putting on this event. So sorry, we don't have any more time for questions, but that's the end of this session. So thank you once again for everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure. See you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.